mass destruction.
Okay. Dr. Pry, if you could you repeat that one more time? We weren't connected completely, but for those who are watching us, you just watched us a moment ago. Dr. Pry was just sharing, but maybe some of you did not hear. For those who have just started watching, are you ready? Please subscribe, click notification, and share this video with as many people as possible. So once again, we're very proud to have with us Dr. Peter Vincent Pry, and we've had him on several other occasions, and he has such great knowledge uh, when he is on our program. So we are very blessed to have him. So if you could, Dr. Pry, introduce yourself, let people know who you are once again, please. Thank you.
Sure. I'm the executive director of the Task Force on National and Homeland Security, which is a congressional advisory board and nonprofit dedicating to protecting the country, our critical infrastructures, like especially the electric grid, from electromagnetic pulse, cyber warfare, and weapons of mass destruction. I worked for the CIA, for the House Armed Services Committee as a professional subject matter expert advising the 60 members on that committee. I served on a number of congressional commissions, the most important of which was the Congressional EMP, or Electromagnetic Pulse Commission, as the chief of staff for 17 years. And I've spent my whole professional life working in the field of national security, mostly on nuclear weapons and weapons of mass destruction.
Wow. So you have a great deal of experience. So we're very honored to have Dr. Peter Pry. He just joined us. We have Dr. Peter Pry, who is going to, we have a lot of questions for him. He's been on the program before. We're honored to have him. And Dr. Pry, thank you very much for being on the program. The first thing we want to talk about, and it's been in the news, what is China's new super weapon? Because that they just tested one, I believe, in August, and according to we had no idea that this hypersonic missile. Can you talk about that for
Yeah,
us?
sure. I've written quite extensively about that. In fact, I've got another report coming out tomorrow about that. That's going to be published by the Center for Security Policy. The report's titled Another Sputnik Moment. This was revealed, apparently China conducted the test in August, and it's I think in September was revealed by Department of Defense officials that the test happened. It was a little hard for them to keep quiet about it because the intelligence community was so shocked. The Chinese tried to do it in secret, and later on tried to deny that the test was of a weapon. But there's no question that it was. And the intelligence community said things like, we had no idea the Chinese could do this. They were surprised at how advanced they were. In effect, this is a new space superweapon. And what it's done, it combines an older technology that was invented by the Soviet Union during the Cold War called a fractional orbital bombardment system, or FOBS. Okay. We may have talked about that on your show earlier in one of our other episodes.
Yes.
With a newer technology, actually a new technology, with a hypersonic glide vehicle, or HGV, or hypersonic warhead. This is the first time these two technologies have been combined. And let me explain what they are. The fractional orbital bombardment system was designed as a secret weapon by the Soviet Union to make a surprise EMP attack against the United States and win a nuclear war with a single blow.
Wow.
It was to be launched. You'd have a nuclear warhead disguised as a satellite. So it would look like a peaceful thing, not a nuclear warhead, but a satellite. And it would be launched not by an intercontinental military missile, but by a space launch vehicle. The space launch vehicle would even launch away from the United States. It would go to the south, not to the north. So it wouldn't look like it was going at the United States. It would cross the North Pole, going to the south, and it would cross the southern hemisphere, across the South Pole, and swing up the other side of the Earth and approach the United States from the south, where we have no ballistic missile early warning radars and no anti-ballistic missile systems during the Cold War. And today, we're basically blind and defenseless from the south. Then when this thing got over the United States, it would burst and cause an EMP to paralyze our command and control, our retaliatory nuclear forces, bombers on their bases, ICBMs in their silos, the ballistic missile submarines that are mostly at port, and to fry the command control communication systems that we use to communicate with submarines at sea, so that we wouldn't be able to launch our retaliatory forces. You could win the nuclear war just with that, but the Soviets always like to make the rubble bounce, and this would be immediately followed by a massed strike over the North Pole. So they would, in addition to the EMP strike, they would go to ground and actually blast the bombers on their bases, blast the ICBMs in their silos, blast the ballistic missile submarines that are in port, and blast the command control communications nodes that we use to communicate with submarines at sea and to control all of our nuclear warfighting. Like NORAD headquarters at Peterson Air Force Base, for example, would be on the target list, and Tinker Air Force Base in Ohio, and of course, probably Washington, D.C. Now, so the Chinese took that, they've got that, but now they've married to it a hypersonic glide vehicle. And a hypersonic glide vehicle is a vehicle that is it's a hypersonic warhead that's designed that can maneuver. And so if you it can make this one thing it can do. It could do many things. All right, it opens up a whole new panoply of military operations that you can conduct with a fractional orbital bombardment system. One thing, probably the most important thing, is to make an even better surprise EMP attack. So now when that satellite, when the fractional orbital bombardment system gets over the United States, it could release, several of these hypersonic warheads, and they would maneuver down to optimum aim points. Normally, in the old ways, the way the Russians would have done it in the Cold War, one warhead would have detonated at high altitude and put the field over the continental United States. But if you do it at lower altitude, the optimum altitude for a super EMP weapon, which the Chinese have now, is probably about 60 kilometers. So instead of having the FOBS warhead go off at 300 kilometers or 400 kilometers over the United States, you could have several warheads riding these hypersonic glide vehicles.
Wow.
Down through the atmosphere so that they're about 60 kilometers over the most important target. So if you've got a peak field, you're putting a peak field over every single one of those important command and control targets and missile fields and bomber bases that you want to take out. So it makes that kind of an attack much more effective. But you can do other things. You could use something like this to fight a conventional war, not just a nuclear war. Okay. For example, to show you how far ahead of us the Chinese are, when I was a graduate student at the University of Southern California studying strategic studies, this was in the early 1980s, we were visited by a famous defense scientist named John Darrah, who came to brief our class about weapons of the future. And he talked about what systems to support what we now call the Global Strike Initiative. And he said, imagine if you could take an intercontinental missile, a long-range missile, and instead of delivering a nuclear warhead, deliver air-to-air missiles. So that, for example, if we were in a fight with somebody in the Middle East or in Europe or in Asia, an air fight, and we were losing our our guys were losing. Suddenly, this thing could appear anywhere in the world in 45 minutes, 30 minutes, 45 minutes or less, depending upon where the action is, and deliver a whole bunch of air-to-air missiles that would shoot down all the enemy airplanes, and and turn the tide of the battle. Or suppose you're in a naval battle, you could have these hypersonic glide vehicles crash right into enemy naval vessels. They're hypersonic. They could be traveling up 25 times the speed of sound. And so when they impact, you wouldn't even need a conventional warhead or an explosive warhead. When they impact the target, the target will just vaporize, from the impact of such a collision. Indeed, you could even think about, if you had enough of these, and Russia eventually will have a lot of them, both Russia and China are building lots of these hypersonic warheads, because you wouldn't even need a nuclear weapon to win a nuclear war, to win a war. Theoretically, these hypersonic glide fields, because they maneuver, they're very accurate. They're as accurate as cruise missiles, maybe even more accurate. We've just started developing hypersonic warheads. China has conducted hundreds of tests. We've only conducted 9 tests. But even the few tests that we've conducted have started to demonstrate the amazing qualities of this kind of a weapon system. The Secretary of the Army said that our early tests of our hypersonic warheads have demonstrated an accuracy of 6 inches. 6 inches. That's dead on. In other words, it's what we would call 0 CEP. It's perfectly accurate. So again, if you wanted to do a first strike and take out, let's say, U.S. ICBM silos, you wouldn't even necessarily need a nuclear warhead. You could fly one of these things right into the silo, and the kinetic energy alone from the direct impact, at these hypersonic velocities, would destroy the silo and the missile inside of it.
Wow.
And produce. So you could basically you could use these weapons to basically do a surgical destruction of our nuclear retaliatory capabilities, causing almost possibly no civilian casualties at all, because the weapons are so precise and the energy is directed so precisely. And so this is the broad panoply. These are some examples. I mean, another example is to deliver anti-tank munitions to a battlefield and take out tanks. If tank armies are engaged in combat someplace, and our side is losing, or one side is losing, you could take out the tanks, or send a hypersonic glide vehicle to deliver smart munitions against airfields across an entire theater and wipe out the other guy's air forces in that way. Anyway, to make this long story short, this scientist talked about these amazing capabilities to us, and we haven't developed any of them, okay? But China and Russia are developing them today. This technologically advanced military strategy called the Global Strike Initiative that we talk about and we think about. The Air Force has been talking about it for 10 years, and planning for it for 10 years. Well, the Russians and Chinese are actually doing it, and the FOBS is the FOBS HGV combination. We don't even have a name for what this system is yet, except that it's a super space weapon, or the clumsy FOBS HGV designation. It's such a new thing. Nobody really has a name for it yet. The Chinese have probably got a name, but they haven't told us what they call it. They're denying that it was a weapon. They're claiming it was a peaceful space test.
That's what I heard. I wanted to ask you.
They want to preserve the element of surprise. The whole point of this thing is supposed to be a secret weapon. But okay, go on. What's your question?
Yeah, I was going to ask you about the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Mark Milley. He's the one that coined the phrase, brought it back, Sputnik moment. Did we really, I want you to talk to the audience, because to the people watching on Are You Ready? I want them to know, because he said it was a Sputnik moment, and people were saying we had no idea. It says we have no idea how they did it. And so, can you tell people, is that absolutely true, that what they say that they had no idea? Are they just saying that to make the Chinese think we really know what's going on, or did they really mean what they said? We had no idea.
Well, I and a small number of other defense analysts who have been telling the Pentagon and the intelligence community for years, including on your show,
Right.
that they've been grossly underestimating the
Yes.
capabilities of North Korea, Russia, and China, are not surprised. I'm not surprised they did this. This is within China's capabilities. China has sent, space vehicles to the moon and beyond. They have a very advanced space program. They have a very advanced nuclear missile program. But those in the Pentagon and the intelligence community, who for whatever reason, for ideological reasons or just sheer stupidity, want to underestimate China, lowball what the Chinese can do. And there are political reasons they may be doing that, by the way, which we can talk about later.
Okay.
They're the ones that are surprised. Unfortunately, those people comprise most of the people in Washington who work in the defense intelligence community. People like me are in a minority, But let's talk about the Miley, who I don't respect, by the way. I mean, right. General Miley, I think he's he's a political general. He's a fool. He's the guy that said he would give China early warning, if we were going to attack. I wish General Miley would call up the guys who launched the FOBS HGV and ask them if they would be nice enough to give us early warning when they plan to attack.
Yes, exactly.
Clearly, they do not plan to give us early warning. The whole point of that is it's a surprise attack weapon, And the worst kind of a surprise attack weapon, an EMP surprise attack weapon. So you could win a nuclear war with a single blow. And they're even trying to cover it up, okay? So, but even a blind hog uncovers an acorn now and then. And General Miley is right, that this is a Sputnik moment. In fact, it's beyond a Sputnik moment. And to my surprise, I have actually found a lot of people, asking me, what is Sputnik? So maybe I should talk about Sputnik a little while.
Yeah, that would be a good idea. Thank you. If you could, because remember, we are the millennials, and they made, what in the world? What is this Sputnik? Can you get a little history for those watching?
Sure. Well, I was 3 years old, when Sputnik was launched, and it was the first satellite. It was the first satellite. It wasn't launched by us. It was launched by the Soviet Union. That was our mortal enemy. We were locked in a life and death struggle with the Soviet Union in 1957. It was an ideological struggle for the future of the world and a military struggle, because everybody thought there was going to be probably a nuclear war.
Yes.
And Sputnik, was the first man-made satellite, first satellite ever put into orbit. And I remember, I was just 3 years old, but I distinctly remember standing in my grandmother's yard at night, surrounded by my cousins and my parents and our neighbors, looking up at the night sky, watching Sputnik pass overhead. And all of us were amazed and terrified, because America was supposed to be the great superpower. America was supposed to be the leader of the world, not just second to none, but ahead of everybody in technology, in everything. And here, the Russians that had threatened to destroy us, that were threatening to bury us, were doing something that we couldn't do. Right over our heads, we could see it, passing overhead. And not everybody understood, people who didn't have the normal person didn't understand exactly what the implications were, but they knew they weren't good. This was a terrifying thing, that this communist totalitarian system that was vowing to destroy the West had performed this technological miracle. And while our missiles were all blowing up on the launch pads, not only couldn't we launch a satellite, we couldn't even get a missile in the air. And Washington, which was much wiser in those days on both sides of the political aisle, this is what the Sputnik moment was. It was when Washington rallied together, both parties closed ranks. LBJ, I think, was LBJ, Lyndon Baines Johnson, who later became president. I think at the time he was leader of the Senate or Speaker of the House. I think he was leader of the Senate. And President Eisenhower, closed ranks. Republicans and Democrats closed ranks. In fact, it became we mobilized the whole nation to address the threat that was Sputnik. We started investing enormous amounts of money into our universities. The reason we have this huge university system that everybody is, and there was a time, before World War II, only the elites would go to college. Most people didn't even graduate high school, okay? Most people would go and get a job, a good job in a factory someplace. It was considered kind of a waste of time even to get a high school diploma. And, getting a degree from a university, was something rich kids did, people who were going to retire on their wealth and didn't have anything better to do, or if you were going to become a doctor or a lawyer or something like that. Very few people did it. But we needed to start cranking out mathematicians and engineers and scientists of all kinds because the Russians were, the Soviet Union was. Yes. We needed to harness the brain power of the whole nation. And so we started, that's why we started this huge university system that we had today. And we're pushing everybody to go to college and get your degree, because the survival of the free world was on the line. We knew that the Cold War was going to be a technological struggle. And if we couldn't seize the technological high ground, we were going to lose the Cold War. Yeah. And our lives along with it. So it was a life and death thing. And it really, as an aside, it's kind of an irony that another reason we started it, we invested so much in the university, was the ideological side of it. We also wanted to produce historians and political scientists and people who could make the case for freedom, defend free, democratic, constitutional systems against totalitarian communist ones, and that's the other reason the universities were founded. And it is a supreme irony, as an aside, that today the universities are hotbeds of Marxism, Leninism, correct, pushing totalitarian values, and are not, leaders of the fight for free, democratic political systems. They're on the side of the tyrants and the totalitarians, and they are. The historians in American universities condemn America. That's where the Antifa movement comes from and all that. Right. So it's really ironic that the university system has not only bit the hand that feed it, but bit the hand that created it, and has become antithetical to its purpose. But that's what the Sputnik moment was. It was this mobilization of the whole country to win the technological struggle of the Cold War. And my critique in one of my critiques in this article that I've written, another Sputnik moment question, is why isn't the country mobilizing, the way we did for Sputnik, now that China has tested this super weapon, and this super weapon goes beyond Sputnik. Sputnik was just a shiny metal sphere, 23 inches in diameter. I think it weighed less than 50 pounds, and it carried a couple of batteries to run a radio set, so that it would go transmit radio signals. It wasn't a weapon, but the people of that time, Washington of that time, had the wisdom to foresee that this was the technological future of warfare, that this satellite could become nuclear warheads, and they would be able to launch a nuclear Pearl Harbor against us in 30 minutes at some point in the future, which was unthinkable at that time. Before the age of ballistic missiles, We were relying on bombers, which are very slow. They take forever to get to their targets. You can defend against them. There's no defense. There was no defense at the time against intercontinental ballistic missiles. And so they saw that coming. Now, this was an actual weapon. So in contrast to Sputnik, what the Chinese did is an actual weapon. All right. So this is, you could argue this is well beyond a Sputnik moment. This is the threat is there. It's not just a potential threat. And it should be, our nation should be rallying. Washington should, the political differences should be put aside. And all of Washington should be rallying to the nation's defense so we don't fall behind Russia and China in the development of these advanced technologies. And I would also point out that this isn't the only Sputnik moment that's happening. Actually, there's a whole panoply of technological breakthroughs that have been achieved by Russia and China, and even North Korea. Of course, North Korea has cheated. They got their technology from Russia and China.
Right, exactly.
Develop it on their own, but they've got it. And we don't have it. We don't have super EMP weapons, for example. These are weapons that can generate nuclear weapons that can generate extraordinarily high EMP fields, higher than our best defenses, so that all of our military systems are vulnerable to them, including our nuclear retaliatory forces. The hypersonic warheads don't have to be delivered only by the fractional orbital bombardment system. They can be delivered by ICBMs or off a ship or off an airplane. So they can come at us without warning from many different directions, from many different platforms. Cyber warfare, offensive cyber warfare. Russia, we talked on your show earlier, I think, about the attack on Colonial Pipeline, where Russia created the ability to take down our critical infrastructures with cyber warfare, and we can't do the same thing back to them. Okay, that's a Sputnik moment. Hypersonic warheads are a Sputnik moment. Super EMP is a Sputnik moment, and artificial intelligence is a Sputnik moment. Artificial intelligence is already being applied to weapon systems like the Russian Poseidon. This is a autonomous torpedo or submarine. Unmanned submarine is probably a better description of it, although it's the size of a big torpedo. It's nuclear powered, so it can go in the oceans for years and trail our ballistic missile submarines or our aircraft carrier groups. Carries a 100-megaton warhead, which is thousands of times more powerful than the Hiroshima and Nagasaki atomic bombs. 100 megatons. That's far more powerful than the most powerful nuclear weapon in the U.S. inventory today. I think it's at least 20 times more powerful than the most powerful thermonuclear warhead the United States has today, and thousands of times more powerful than the Hiroshima and Nagasaki atomic bombs. And the Poseidon is artificially intelligent. It runs itself. It's designed to trail. The Russians can tell it, go trail that aircraft carrier group forever until we tell you to detonate and take it out. With a 100-megaton warhead, the underwater shockwave can travel enormous distances, over 100 miles, and destroy aircraft carriers or submarines. So you don't even have to be close to the target, just roughly in the vicinity of the target to destroy it. We only have a handful of submarines, ballistic missile submarines, on patrol every day. The Russians are planning to deploy enough Poseidons so that 2 of them will be trailing every one of our submarines. And so artificial intelligence can be used in hypersonic warheads. I predict that this is going to happen. The Chinese are already talking about merging hypersonic warheads with artificial intelligence to make them more accurate, for example. You can, in effect, put an artificial brain into a warhead, so that it can evade missile defenses better and more accurately target itself. And even communicate with other warheads so that they can do a more efficient attack. Suppose one of the boosters fails and some of the hypersonic warheads that are supposed to attack some targets, are not arriving. The hypersonic warheads can communicate with each other and say, hey, The guys who were supposed to attack these targets are not here. But there have been spare warheads launched in the attack. You guys go cover those targets. And so they can kind of coordinate themselves at the last minute to make sure all the targets get destroyed. So artificial intelligence, and the guy who runs, I don't remember his name, but the Pentagon knows it's so far behind the Chinese in artificial intelligence and cyber warfare that they created a special official position for that to try to make up for the shortfall. And just a couple of weeks ago, the person who was assigned to that position resigned. He said it's useless. We're already so far behind China, that it's inevitable that they're going to defeat us in 20, 25 years. We'll never catch up to them. That's pretty bad, So we have Sputnik moments on all of these areas, and yet Washington is not doing what it did in 1957 and mobilizing the whole country and pulling together politically, burying the hatchet politically so that this nation can survive.
I wanted to ask you regarding that, what you mentioned about the weaponry that China and Russia, and they're way ahead of us. Now, in probability, if you had to give it a percentage, what are the probabilities, would you say, right now, at this moment here, we're in November of 2021. What are the probabilities of China doing or Russia using that hypersonic weapon on the United States, or hypersonic EMP? What would you say the probabilities were for such an event?
Well, the answer is different depending upon which hat I'm wearing. If I'm approaching this like a military analyst, I would say it's inevitable, that they aren't building these weapons to not use them. They're not building the weapons for deterrence. They're offensive weapons. They're meant to be used to win a war. So they must intend to use them. Otherwise, why bother? So I would say it's inevitable, especially given the fact that we're doing nothing to defend ourselves. And it might happen extremely soon if I were a military analyst. If I'm speaking for my military analyst hat, that's what I would say. Okay.
How soon would you say, if you were going to say months, years?
I would say possibly before the end of the Biden administration.
Before.
Because they would want to see, they want to see how far we sink. They want to see we're in free fall right now in everything. Our economy is in free fall. Our patriotism is in free fall. Everything about our country, our military is in the free fall. Everything about our country is in free fall. We haven't hit rock bottom yet. If I was from a military perspective, standing in the shoes of the Russian and Chinese general staffs, the North Korean general staff, why would you attack before the United States has hit rock bottom? You want to wait and see just how bad is it going to get? How much further is the Biden administration going to disarm the United States? There are, for example, right now there are these strategic stability talks going on. When Biden met with Putin in Geneva back in June, Biden walked right into the arms control trap that former KGB agent Vladimir Putin set for Biden. And both sides are going to engage in these strategic stability talks. And some of the things that are on the table, for example, are, the reason we're building, for example, the Russians and Chinese claim the reason they're building all these advanced weapons is because they feel threatened by U.S. ballistic missile defenses. They're afraid that we're going to deploy space-based defenses like Star Wars eventually. And the American left says the same thing and blames the United States and says we're causing the arms race because Ronald Reagan proposed Star Wars, and that's why they're building these weapons today. Well, Star Wars was canceled in 1993, and Ronald Reagan was a long time ago. Our whole missile defenses, our strategic missile defenses, comprise 44 ground-based interceptors that are not capable of intercept. They're designed for North Korean and Iranian ballistic missile threats. They were deliberately designed dumb so that they can't intercept Russian and Chinese weapons. They're not sophisticated enough to do that. So we, in effect, have no defense against Russia and China. So that is not a serious argument. And by the way, how come the Russians feel threatened when they have 10,000, anti-missile and anti-aircraft missiles around their country? They have the strongest, most robust anti-missile and anti-aircraft defense system in the world. And they have deep underground shelters that can accommodate hundreds of thousands that are the political military leaders that are completely invulnerable to our nuclear attack. So why don't we feel threatened by that? How come it's not destabilizing and bad for Russia to have all these defenses, but it's destabilizing and bad that Ronald Reagan talked about the Strategic Defense Initiative. So the ghost of the Strategic Defense Initiative is worse than the actual anti-missile and anti-bomber systems and deep bunker systems that Russia is still building. They're building more bunkers all the time.
Correct. Yes,
So as a military analyst, I would say, I'd be concerned that, that it could come as soon as before the end of the Biden administration, because at some point, at some point they're going to want to see just how stupid the Biden administration is and how much they're willing to give up. For example, it's possible, as we've talked about before on your show, that as a result of the nuclear posture review, we may ban our own ICBMs. We may dismantle the ICBM force.
Oh my goodness.
If I was on the general staff, I would definitely want to wait and see, is the United States going to dismantle its ICBMs? It's going to make it a lot easier to win a nuclear war if we do that, And I might also want to see just how much further ahead of the United States I can get. But there's another hat that I wear.
Okay.
A historian's hat. And and this hat has a different story to tell, in some ways more depressing than the one that the military analyst will say. And it is this, that you can win without war. And that may be the game that the Russians and Chinese are playing. After all, Sun Tzu, the famous Chinese philosopher of war, who wrote before Christ, said the greatest victory is to win without war. And Russia and China have both seen that when the United States was well managed by wise leaders, that we managed to win without war. For example, the Cuban Missile Crisis. The Soviet Union was humiliated. Khrushchev not only lost his position, but he was imprisoned, and some people think eventually actually executed because of his defeat and humiliation of the USSR during the Cuban Missile Crisis. The stakes were extremely high for both the United States and Soviet Union in the Cuban Missile Crisis, but we won that crisis without it becoming a war. We defeated the Soviet Union in that crisis without war.
That's
and then
right.
Reagan, because he built up our forces and introduced the threat of the Strategic Defense Initiative to make Soviet nuclear forces obsolete. We never actually deployed SDI, but just the mere threat, and they knew it was technologically possible. That was enough to deter the Soviet Union from launching World War III, and then communism collapsed of its own weight. So we won the Cold War. We have forgotten the lessons of the Cold War and of the Cuban Missile Crisis, and of many other cases where we won without war because of our technological and strategic superiority. They learned those lessons. The losers always learn from history, you know, and that's I think they're playing the long game. And why should they go to war when they can win without war? They also the main reason Russia and China fear the United States, hate the United States, and want to eliminate the United States is because we're free people, because of the U.S. Constitution. But right now, our freedoms are very much at risk from our own government, from the Biden administration. Our Constitution is trampled on almost daily. You know, our system has drifted far away. When you cease having free and fair elections, you know, you're becoming a tyranny, if we're not already a tyranny. When you look at the COVID business, the mask wearing, which isn't necessary because COVID is not any more serious than the flu, yet the government is so determined that everybody should wear masks and obey these COVID rules. Why is that? It's being used as an excuse to control people. That's what it is. I'm shocked that Americans are letting their children be vaccinated, you know? But, you know, if the American people become sheep instead of eagles, if we tear up the Constitution, if we allow ourselves to become a tyranny and hoist the flag of tyranny with our own hands over ourselves, they have no reason to attack us then, because we are not an alternative political system to them. Then we're just like them. Now, continuing with the historians, unfortunately, totalitarian states are not usually content with that. They're totalitarian states for a reason. We call them totalitarian for a reason, because they want total control, total dominance over everything. A good example of this is the Hitler-Stalin Pact during World War II. When Hitler basically had won World War II in 1940, I mean, he won World War II, you know, and if he had just honored his pact with Stalin, the totalitarian giants of Nazi Germany and Soviet communism, fascist Italy, and Imperial Japan, you know, would have dominated the world. But totalitarian states don't believe in coexistence, even with each other. And they're so paranoid, they feel the case of the last man standing. And so Hitler threw away the victory of World War II by invading the Soviet Union. And that was his doom. And thank goodness he did, because we wouldn't have won World War II if he hadn't made that colossal mistake. But I raise that as an example that totalitarian states will fall to fighting among themselves. So even if we became a tyranny here in the United States, it might buy us time, but sooner or later they would come after us, because they're totalitarian systems, and they would want to either destroy us as a people, or they would want to control us. It's not enough merely for Washington to control us. They would want to control us directly, unless perhaps they had a real Quisling, you know, I don't know, maybe Biden is capable of being a Quisling like that. Somebody, you know, I mean, Nazi Germany, for example, probably would have tolerated Vichy France, you know, forever, because they were so subordinate, so dominated, willing to do anything, you know, the Nazis demanded of them. And when I look at the kind of political leadership we have now, and the kind of political movements we have in this country on the left, Antifa and Black Lives Matter, you know, it's possible if people like that became in charge of this country, that they might not attack us, you know, because would never be able to come back under such bad leadership, and they would be such submissive, dominated leadership, dominated by the Soviets. In fact, I sometimes wonder if what's happening is because the Biden administration is in the process of surrender, and they've already decided that they can't win, and they're just going to let Russia and China and the new Axis bloc, Russia, China, North Korea, Iran, and international terrorism, just take over the world and curl up in the fetal position and hope that they leave us alone and let us survive. Just leave us alone, and we're going to concentrate on saving the planet from climate change. And after all, we're globalists, and if we set a good example by being passive and meek and don't get in your way and let you have your way everywhere, maybe you'll come around. And
you meant a lot of stuff you said. One of the things that you're talking about China, I heard in the news that they were practicing a mock. They built like an aircraft carrier or in the desert somewhere in China, and they are actively practicing destroying that battleship, I believe, or aircraft carrier.
Aircraft carriers.
Aircraft carrier. So, I mean, it seems to me what we're talking about is and we're not. What really bothers me sometimes is the word that they use. Is that, quote, we're concerned. We're concerned. Instead of saying, hey, you guys better stop. What in the world are you doing dropping bombs on one practicing? Is that we're concerned. Why do you think they keep just saying we're concerned, but they don't really come out and tell them, a little forcefully? Does it go with what you just said, that we're just laying back and just go ahead and do whatever you like?
Because they're weak, for the same reason that Neville Chamberlain, all before World War II, came up with one excuse after another as to explain away what Adolf Hitler was doing. Because he was so deluded, because he was so afraid of a repeat of World War I, and just thought it was unthinkable that anyone would go to war, because the consequences would be so catastrophic. And he was so afraid of that, that he would rather lie to himself and lie to the people and convince himself, oh, Adolf Hitler, surely he can be reasoned with, that he's a rational man. We can't listen to those crazy people like Winston Churchill, who are warning us that these guys really mean it and that they're going to go to war. Churchill is always putting the worst interpretation on everything. But I, Neville Chamberlain, will save the world from another world war, by cutting a deal with Hitler. I know I can negotiate with him. I know I can convince him, that, he must be, anybody who has risen to power over a nation must be somewhat rational. And after all, we're to blame. The West actually, most of the West actually blamed itself. The Versailles Treaty was unfair. We were wrong to rub the noses of Germany in the defeat of World War I. It has caused a backlash of German nationalism. So we have to actually engage in a policy of appeasement and appease them, to calm the anger of the Germans, and show them that we really want peace and that we're not a threat to them. I mean, this is exactly, doesn't this sound like our attitude today? This is exactly the attitude that we have today. And it flows out of this blame America first philosophy that is, not surprisingly, is the philosophy of most of the people who run Washington and the Biden administration, because this is what Harvard and Yale churns out. People who blame America for everything and think everything is all our fault. And, and China and Russia are only reacting to bad things the United States is doing, and we'd better stop it. These people, that, by the way, because the answer, the question we didn't get to when I was talking about the Sputnik moment, all right, is why is this not a Sputnik moment? Why? Well, that's because there's this thing, I call it the anti-nuclear media complex. Okay, it used to be that, I mean, when Sputnik was there, the people who were authorities on national security knew what they were talking about. with the Department of Defense, our scientists in the nuclear weapons program, and these people were patriots. They had seen the wonder weapons of World War II. They had fought World War II, many of them personally, or witnessed the consequences of World War II, and they didn't want that to happen to the free world again. But these people who are running Washington now, they don't have any experience in war. Their perceptions have been molded by our university system, the Harvard, Yale, and then the State Department, elites, who believe all they do is negotiation, So this philosophy of blaming America first, blaming American imperialism, blaming American racism and everything, well, I shouldn't say they don't say it in public. Actually, a lot of times they do say it in public, all right? But their animosity toward the United States is a lot deeper than what they are even willing to say in public. And these people are ignorant. They don't understand the science and technology of those weapon systems. Most of them have never served in the intelligence community or in the military and don't have a scientific background. Most of them have political science degrees from Ivy League schools, or they have served on congressional staff on the Democrat side and got where they are by brown nosing, okay? And they buy into the left-wing ideology, which is a fantasy. It's a fantasy. It has no connection to the real world. And that's why we are not having a Sputnik moment, because the country is divided, unlike in 1957 when the country united. Come together because these people are so polarized. I actually have seen in the Washington Post and the New York Times and on CNN so-called analysts blaming the Pentagon and blaming Republican congressional staffers and saying, oh, the Pentagon and the Republican congressional staffers, they're trying to hype the threat from China. They're trying to hype the threat from Russia. What hypocrisy for them to say we're trying to hype the threat from Russia, all the time they were saying Russia interfered with the elections, but they ignored the real nuclear and military threat from Russia that was happening all that time. And that's because we're an evil military industrial complex that wants to get engaged in wars and needs arms racing to keep the big military industrial complex going. I mean, that's what they believe. And unfortunately, these people are in power. They're in political power in the Democrat Party, in the White House, in the Democrat half of the Senate, in the Democrat majority in the House of Representatives. And so that's why there's no Sputnik moment today, even though we have many Sputniks, and we're much more threatened today in 2021 than we were in 1957 by these technological breakthroughs. The country is in a real crisis, because it's divided against itself, and there's no reasoning with these people.
Right.
It's religion. That what they believe is not based on logic and facts, and reason. They've been brainwashed into this by the universities.
Right.
Their own view of themselves, their own world view is tied up with this, all of the policies that they're following. They would have to admit that they were wrong about almost everything, in order to change course. And they're not going to do that. It would be like renouncing their religious faith. And it is a religious faith. It's a secular humanist religious faith. That's what Marxism is. I mean, they're Marxist Leninists with an American university spin on it that includes identity politics and racial and sexual identity politics, mixed into it. Even Lenin would have puked at that, but he had a pure form of Marxism, but that's what it is, and it's a secular religion.
Okay, I want to ask you, in your article, can you explain to our audience, and are you ready, what is the difference between I think you may have, but just to make clear tonight, what is the difference between peace through strength and peace for our time. And I think you may have mentioned it, but just to make it clear to those who are watching, the difference between the two.
Okay. Well, peace through strength was the policy, the program that Ronald Reagan used to win the Cold War.
Okay.
It was not based chiefly on negotiation. It was based chiefly on building up U.S. military and nuclear capabilities so that the Soviet Union did not dare attack us. It was our military strength, that won the Cold War, because he made sure that we either had equality or superiority over the Soviet Union, so they would not go to war. Our strength kept the peace. Peace for our time is the phrase used by Neville Chamberlain. I think it was 1938 when he came back from negotiating with Adolf Hitler, and Hitler agreed he wasn't going to invade Poland.
Correct.
That he was going to be content, with taking over the Sudetenland in Czechoslovakia. And peace for our time represents the idea that peace is achieved through negotiation and treaties. And historically, when you're dealing with the totalitarian powers, those treaties aren't worth the paper they're written on. So they get torn up. Within the year, Adolf Hitler broke the agreement and took over all of Czechoslovakia, and then invaded Poland in 1939, and World War II was on.
Now, you also stated that Russia, and before one of our last questions tonight, you stated that Russia has cheated on the arms control treaty. How many times would you say now regarding arms control? Because we talked about China. Is China in an arms control treaty or not? And I want to make that clear. And I know with Russia, we've been on an arms control treaty, and you've stated that they probably have cheated many times. Can you explain to our audience that?
Sure. Well, let's start with China. China, we do not have a lot of arms control treaties with China. China is a signatory to the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty. And that's about the only, I think maybe they're a signatory to the Outer Space Treaty, but I'm not sure about that. In the Outer Space Treaty, you're not supposed to send nuclear weapons into space, and this test in August, the intention of a FOBS HGV thing is to do an EMP attack, which entails putting a nuclear weapon in space.
Nice.
But for sure, China is a signatory to the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty. They're not supposed to conduct nuclear tests.
Okay.
The CTBT has been in force for 30 years. Now, it's not been ratified by the U.S. Senate, okay, but the U.S. has observed the CTBT anyway, better than anyone. And only, I think it was last year, maybe it was the year before that, it might have been in 2019, but it took forever. The State Department is always the last to admit, when there's cheating, because their bread and butter is based on these treaties. Their reputation is based on these treaties. So they're very reluctant to admit. The evidence ends up having to be overwhelming before the State Department can be persuaded to say, yeah, admit they're cheating. And we should, the situation we have is the State Department gets to say if they're cheating or not. Okay, it's not anybody else. It's the State Department's job to do that, which is a big mistake because the State Department has an enormous conflict of interest. They're not objective when it comes to assessing compliance with arms control treaties. And but the State Department finally admitted in 2019 or 2020 that China and Russia have been cheating on the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty for 30 years. That means that Russia and China have probably got a 30-year technological head start in the nuclear and the design of nuclear weapons. And that's how they come up with all these highly advanced nuclear warheads. Whereas in new generation nuclear warheads, whereas all of our nuclear weapons are literally from Ronald Reagan. You know, we haven't tested a nuclear weapon in 30 years. And all of the nuclear weapons we have in our arsenal are Cold War era weapons that we just keep patching together. We don't have anybody left in our nuclear weapon labs who's ever designed a nuclear weapon. They're all retired or dead. You know,
Wow.
yeah, we even have difficulty maintaining these weapons. There was a critical electrical component, for example. We had to learn how to reinvent that component. Cost us a small fortune just to keep the old warhead going. Okay, it's not making a new warhead, you know, but the blueprints or something were lost about how to make this part for this old warhead. You know, because the designers were retired. The industrial facility that used to make them is no longer in existence. So they had to come up with a. They had to redesign this particular component. So it's like you know, they're armed with the nuclear equivalent of the most modern aircraft we have today, and we're armed with biplanes from the Cold War. You know, the nuclear equivalent of biplanes from the Cold War. You know, it is not true, by the way, that a bomb is a bomb is a bomb. You know, it really makes a big difference to have modern, new generation nuclear weapons. The nuclear weapons from the Cold War are chiefly designed for blast and shock, you know, for blasting military bases and, you know, maybe blasting cities if you have to, blasting defense industrial centers, blast and shock. You know, the new nuclear weapons, the Russians and Chinese have got plenty of those. I talked about the 100 megaton warhead they have. So they are certainly capable of making that kind of weapon and have that kind of weapon. In fact, they've got that kind of weapon in spades in the case of the Poseidon. You know, we don't have anything like that. But they have much more sophisticated nuclear weapons, super EMP, nuclear weapon specialized for effects. There are nuclear weapons that are specialized for neutron radiation, X radiation, clean nuclear weapons, selectable yield, so you can dial the yield down really low, so you could just take out a bridge, or dial the yield way up and take out an army division. And do it all without generating any radioactive fallout. You know, right? That makes it a clean nuclear weapon that makes it much more usable. We don't have anything like that, but that's what the Russians and Chinese have been doing for 30 years while cheating on the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty. That's just one treaty. The Russians have been cheating on all of them. We have many treaties with the Russians. I think I talk about 4 of them in the article, but there's many other treaties that they are cheating on. People can actually Google. It's called the General Advisory Committee on Arms Control and Disarmament. Okay, this was it's called the Gaff Report for short, General Advisory Committee, and that's online. Not sure you can find it by the information I just gave you, but during the Reagan administration, a special committee, the GAC, the General Advisory Committee, was established to say, this was in the 80s, you know, we've signed all these arms control treaties since the 1960s. We have a quarter century of experience with Russia with arms control. What's the record? You know, how many of these treaties have they been following? And the GAC concluded that they have been cheating on all the treaties for the course of 25 years. And the State Department, to this day, has classified that report and will not declassify that report. But there is an executive summary that kind of briefly sums it all up. The actual report is hundreds of pages long, but there's a short executive summary that that they weren't able to classify, you know, that was put out by the committee unclassified, and that is available to the public. And so we know that you know, from the 1960s through the 1980s, you know, that they were cheating on all the treaties. And all the treaties since then, they've also cheated on those, except possibly New START. The State Department has not yet admitted that Russia is cheating on New START. But but that's because the verification provisions of New START are so bad, that the Russians can do things that are just outrageous. For example, when we go to count the number of warheads on a missile to see that they're being honest about how many warheads are being carried on this missile, they can actually put a cover over the missile so we can't count the warheads, and the State Department is okay with that. And we only get to do that a couple times a year with just one missile. I mean, the Russians are so bold and insulting about these things. They don't even bother to cheat so we can't see it. I mean, they could take the warheads off. They don't even want to do that. It would be relatively easy, and let us count the warheads and then just put the warheads back on afterwards. But they have such contempt for us, just the kind of contempt that Adolf Hitler had for Neville Chamberlain. But I often say it's, the State Department can't even pass a simple intelligence test. Those intelligence tests complete the pattern. You might see a banana and an orange and a strawberry, and then you have multiple choice. What's the next thing going to be? Some kind of a fruit? Or is it going to be a hammer? Or is it going to be a wrench? Well, it's going to be some kind of fruit when you fill in that blank, right?
Right.
And so here we have all the arms control treaties we've ever signed with Russia. Cheat. Then the New START treaty. Well, we don't know they're cheating there. We're going to say they're still in compliance.
Well,
yeah. Right.
Well, Dr. Pry, it's been a pleasure having you on the program. But before we go tonight, you've given a great deal of information to all those who have watched here on Are You Ready? What would you want, let's say to the American people in the coming months, or in the next 2 months? We're going to be entering the new year, 2022, and with Biden administration, upcoming changes, things that are coming. Do you think, and you think you alluded to it, that China and Russia are just sitting there watching? What would you want to say to the American people? How should they prepare? What should they do? What should they be doing in the coming months?
Well, for one thing, we shouldn't give up on politics and the political system, even though I too am very skeptical,
right,
about whether we can have free and fair elections in this country after the Democrats cheated on the 2020 election, because I believe the Biden administration is illegitimate. He's not legitimately the president of the United States. The Democrats have to prove that to me for me to accept it, and their resistance to an audit of that election is extremely suspicious to me. If they really won the election, they should be the first ones that would want to do an audit to prove that they really won it, but they don't want to do that. And I would remind everybody, that when the Bush administration was challenged by the Democrats over the election with Al Gore,
right,
the Supreme Court did step in, and there was an audit of that because the Democrats wanted it, and Bush did win, that. So we did it for the Democrats, when they had questions about the veracity of the election. Why is it that Republicans are supposed to shut up and lay down and not protest when we have very legitimate concerns about that? So we need to remain politically engaged. It's a hopeful sign that in Virginia, Republicans were able to sweep the board, even though Virginia is a Democrat state basically, and is right in the backyard of Washington, D.C., where the center of cheating is located, cheating on American elections. So there's hope, we may be able to take the country back. People should get involved and support conservative candidates for the House and Senate, and so that we can kick the rascals out and maybe win, get control of the government back. Uh,
We hope so.
people should urge their governors and their state legislators to follow the brave example of Ron DeSantis in Florida and stand up for states' rights and defy any attempt by the government, the federal government, to violate the Constitution. You know, we as a body should be saying no to efforts, you know, to force us to get COVID vaccines if we don't want them, or to make our kids get COVID vaccines if we don't want to vaccinate our kid, or wear masks. You know, we should fight and protest against all of this stuff and be activists against all this stuff. You know, we should urge our state governors and state legislators to protect our electric grid so that we can keep the lights on.
Yes.
And keep our people alive. You know, don't wait for Washington to protect the electric grid, because it's not likely to happen. You know, that it's on their list of things to do, but it's a low priority thing, way below climate change for them.
That's correct.
And of course, you should prepare personally. You know, stockpile food and water, have a medicine kit and know how to use it.
Yes.
Think about where you live. Is it in a major metropolitan area? When the lights go out, that's going to be very dangerous. You get a farm in the country, or if you have a friend or relatives who have a farm in the country, you know, you ought to work out a plan with them about, if the worst happens, being able to relocate and hunker down and survive what's coming.
Well, thank you, Dr. Pry. I mean, I totally agree. We need to be prepared, and everybody should do their part, especially contacting the Congress and hopefully praying that there will be a change from more, instead of socialist to more capitalist thinking. And most importantly, I also encourage all of you to pray, because prayer is extremely important too. Dr. Pry, thank you so much for being on Are You Ready once again. We're so honored to have had you, and thank you for sharing all the things you shared this evening.
Yes, I agree with you about praying. You know, the great German statesman Otto von Bismarck once said that God looks after fools, drunkards, little children in the United States of America. So if God hears our prayers, maybe he'll continue to take care of us.
That's our prayer. We pray for God's divine protection every day. Well, thank you, everybody. Thank you for being on Are You Ready? Don't forget to please subscribe and click notification and share this video with as many people as possible. Thank you very much, Dr. Pry. I hope happy Thanksgiving and a Merry Christmas to you and to your family.
Thank you so much, my friend. Merry Christmas and happy Thanksgiving to you as well.
Thank you very much. And everybody have a blessed evening till we meet again on Thursday. Thank you, Dr. Pry. Good evening, everyone. Shalom. Good night.